Hi, boys and girls. It's Mr. Wasemann, and once again, I am here writing my biography about my famous Hoosier topic, Steve McQueen. I am in the middle of describing his claim to fame, which is kind of what the whole biography is about, what made my famous Hoosier famous. In yesterday's tutorial, where I described the beginning of his career in Career Highlights 1 and 2, I kind of talked about where he got his start. At this point in his story, he's building some momentum. I want to bring your attention to this slide that describes career highlight number 3. I've already taken the time to write some information down, but I wanted to point out a couple of things that might help you in your drafting process. The attention McQueen earned from starring in Wanted Dead or Alive led to a role in the 1959 World War II film Never So Few, starring Frank Sinatra. Now, as I am drafting, one of the things I need to be thinking about is this concept of redundant words, or words that I use over and over again. As a good writer, I want to make sure that I'm keeping things interesting by not repeating myself all the time. Now, I have two choices when I come across redundant words. I can either substitute one word for another, or I can choose to remove it. Now, let's see if you notice what word is repeated. The attention McQueen earned from starring in Wanted Dead or Alive led to a role in the 1959 World War II film Never So Few, starring Frank Sinatra. I use the word starring, the verb that describes an actor being in a film, twice in one sentence. So I'm being redundant. So I need to think of a way to make this sentence a little bit more concise, a little bit more interesting. I could choose to change the word starring, or one of the words that, one of the times I use the word starring, to a different word, like performing or acting. But instead, what I think I'm going to do is I'm just going to remove it. Sometimes good writers remove things to make their writing clearer. So let's reread this sentence. The attention McQueen earned from Wanted Dead or Alive led to a role in the 1959 World War II film Never So Few, starring Frank Sinatra. And I just took out the word starring because in the previous slide, I go out of my way to describe the fact that McQueen does star in this TV show. He's the lead actor. So context allows me to not use that word starring in. So I just took it out. Let's look at some other points. Okay. In my description of Steve McQueen's career, I mentioned the fact that he didn't get chosen for this film, but he was a replacement. Because another actor, Sammy Davis Jr., had a falling out with Frank Sinatra, who was a very popular singer slash actor back in the day. But it was this role that got the attention of the director, John Sturges. Went on to cast McQueen in his next movie, the blockbuster Western The Magnificent Seven in 1960. Yul Brynner was the lead actor among an ensemble cast, but it was the strength of McQueen's performance that helped the movie become a hit. Now that's important because in the next slide, I continue this thread. The success of The Magnificent Seven led John Sturges to cast Steve McQueen again in the lead role in the World War II drama The Great Escape in 1963. The fact that he worked well with a particular director allowed Steve McQueen more high-profile roles. Okay? So making sure I mention that this director, John Sturges, had a hand in making Steve McQueen a star. Okay. At this point, McQueen left television to focus on his film career. Now, this is the second point I wanted to make. He became a very popular actor, and Steve McQueen earned a lot of roles over the course of the next 15 years or so. In here, I've created a sentence that's basically a list, okay? McQueen left television to focus on his film career. McQueen starred in a number of notable movies, including, and you'll notice that I just wrote a series of titles that I put in parentheses, quotation marks, And then the dates were put in parentheses right next. So it reads like this, including Love with a Proper Stranger, 1963, Nevada Smith, 1966, The Thomas Crown Affair, 1968, and so on. So I made a list of some of the movies that Steve McQueen starred in. I want to bring your attention to this next slide that kind of bucks against the trend of being sequential and chronological, because I take the time to mention 3 movies in particular, and I expanded my description of his career by adding an extra slide. I want you to pay attention to this sentence. McQueen's role as a sailor on a gunboat in 1966, The Sand Pebbles, earned him an Academy Award nomination. Now, if you go back to the previous slide, I mentioned a bunch of movies that McQueen starred in that take place after 1968, or I'm sorry, 1966. So I mentioned movies like The Towering Inferno and Tom Horn. These are movies he starred in after The Sand Pebble. But in my sentence here, I'm just listing some popular movies that he was in. But in this paragraph, I bring attention or focus to a couple of key roles. And so I'm talking about these movies a little out of order. I continue with one of McQueen's signature roles was in 1968's Bullitt, which was notable for an iconic 10-minute car chase sequence through the streets of San Francisco. Again, I brought attention to this movie, even though I mentioned movies in the previous slide that happened after 1968, because this was one of Steve McQueen's most notable roles. Some actors are known for roles, even though they might go on to star in movies later on in their careers. Harrison Ford is most notably known for being both Han Solo and Indiana Jones in those franchises, but he's gone on to star in many other movies throughout his career that had nothing to do with those roles. But still, when people describe Harrison Ford, Han Solo, and Indiana Jones are probably the first 2 roles that pop up in conversation. The same is true with this movie Bullitt. And then I go on to explain that McQueen was known for playing an action hero, and he was usually this cool loner anti-hero type. But I make a point to describe that he would take roles that challenge this image, like the French convict Henry Chartier in 1973's Papillon, or a Norwegian doctor and scientist in 1978's Enemy of the People. So again, sequencing things in chronological order is very important. However, because I wanted to draw particular attention to certain movie roles, I made sure that I took them and wrote them in a separate paragraph so that I could highlight these roles a little bit more in detail. In some of the other movies mentioned, all I do is I mention the movie title and the date. So it's important for you to describe in detail certain accomplishments that your famous Hoosier did during their lifetime that brings them attention. Yes, it's true that Steve McQueen starred in the movie The Thomas Crown Affair in 1968, but that was not as iconic or as popular as 1968's Bullitt. So those are a couple of things I want you to be thinking about as you are crafting your description of your famous Hoosier's claim to fame. What's the important parts that you really want to bring attention to? Okay, actors want to do well in films and make a lot of money, but earning an Academy Award is a true accomplishment for a serious actor. So I wanted to make sure that I brought attention to that point. Okay. Now, the last thing I want to talk about is this last section about Steve McQueen's career, how it came to an end. Now, some of you are describing famous Hoosiers that are still alive today. Some of you are describing famous Hoosiers that are still pursuing their careers today. However, many of you have researched topics where the person has since passed away. And so the final slide in that career highlight or claim to fame needs to describe, for those who have died, how they died. And I went into detail describing Steve McQueen's death. Unfortunately, he contracted a type of cancer that was associated with asbestos exposure, something that is now known to be cancerous, but back in the 60s and 70s, that was not common knowledge. So I go into a little detail describing that. So again, if there's a particular circumstance to your famous Hoosier's death, like they were in a gunfight or they died in an accident, you want to go into a little detail describing that. So it's important to include the date, when and where the person died, but it's a good idea to also go into a little bit of detail with that. Okay, and that's it. I will talk to you again about more aspects of your biography. Until we talk again, happy writing.